at Roswell. This is really, I think, if not the beginning of the story, and that beginning, of course, may go back millennia, but it's really what brought the phenomenon to the public attention and turned this into something stratospherically famous. And what really happened is that on day one, the military themselves facilitated a press release which stated the many rumors surrounding what they referred to as a flying disc have been resolved because we have gained possession of one of these objects. Now, within 24 hours of that statement saying we've got one of these flying discs, flying saucer, whatever the terminology you prefer, within 24 hours, the story was flipped 180 degrees, and the military said, we've made a terrible mistake, it was just a weather balloon. Yeah. Well, the odd thing about that, of course, is that the 509th Bomb Group, based at Roswell, was at the time the only atomic bomb-capable squadron anywhere in the world. These people were the best of the best, the elite. And they saw weather balloons on an almost weekly basis. You think they couldn't tell the difference? So whatever actually happened is maybe lost in the mists of time, or maybe not. We'll see. But that's where many people believe that the cover-up began. Roswell.
And Frankie, it was only in the early 1980s, when documents began to come from what is called Majestic 12, that we read a completely different detail of July 2nd to July 5th of 1947. And my own feeling is that people that I have talked to who were alive and unfortunately are past now, there were three sites. One was between Corona and Roswell. One was on White Sands in an area near the Trinity site where we had exploded the first atomic bomb test. And the third was at the Mescalero Indian Reservation near Alamogordo, New Mexico. So there was a kind of triangle. And the interesting thing is, not one of those three sites was the form of a disc. The people who actually retrieved said that they were shaped a little bit like a wedge of pie, but as General Twining said, he called them a plan form because they had this shape, and a plan form was used, a word in the 40s during the war, of something that had these kinds of curves and had aerodynamic kind of a form to it. And when we look back at what the government was scrambling to do to cover this up, they already knew by the time that they started sending out the weather balloon that they had two bodies at the White Sands location. They had a very crashed disc with other bodies at the Mescalero Indian, and between Corona and Roswell. I went to Corona on a field investigation and found a rancher who knew the Mac Brazel, the rancher who went into town to say there's all this strange silver debris on my ranch. And that rancher, who knew Mac Brazel very well, looked me in the eye and he said, I talked with Mac, and he said to me, there is a horrible secret. They weren't green.
Where do you think the wreckage might have been taken to? What do we know now? Do we know any more about where it could have gone? What kind of places they would have taken that to examine?
Well, there's actually some documentary evidence that it was taken to Wright-Patterson Airfield afterwards, which of course is where the Foreign Technology Division of the, well, it wasn't really the U.S. Air Force yet, but where they had all that foreign technology stuff and where they would study enemy aircraft. Foreign technology does not necessarily just mean Russian, Chinese technology. It could literally mean anything from another world. So,
and the transition was right field to Wright-Patterson later, so right field is right.
Yeah, so I went to right field. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of bring up is, I wrote a book last year called Hidden Agenda, NASA and the Secret Space Program, where I covered this, and I covered the Kenneth Arnold incident. And the wedge shape always intrigued me, and what Arnold talked about was this wiggling behavior, skipping behavior. And I kind of think, if you look at the shape, they look a little bit like the German aircraft that was developed but never actually flown, called the HO-229. And I tend to think that Kenneth Arnold's sighting might have actually been a squadron of these flying wing aircraft that were going really fast because they were jets, and they were jumping all over the place out at near Mount Rainier, Washington, which was really, really super isolated. And then the next piece that comes from that is that, okay, it was spotted, it was a national sensation, and I'm thinking to myself, well, then I would think they would have gotten a little bit panicked, because these are secret technologies they're trying to develop. So what's more isolated than Mount Rainier, Washington? Well, Roswell, New Mexico, even today, is about as isolated as you can get. So I thought, well, maybe these wedge-shaped craft are actually secret aircraft they were testing. It would have been a great place to test, because again, you had the best of the best there. So I think that could account for some of this stuff in terms of the descriptions. But then when you get into the MJ-12 documents, which I think are absolutely authentic,
right,
you tell a much, much stranger story. So I wonder if this isn't also a sign of the earliest cooperation between the U.S. government and extraterrestrial intelligence.
And let me just add one sentence from the document that, to me, underscores that we're dealing with something that was non-human. Our government knew it early on, and that is in the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, the first of the summaries of what happened between Roswell and these other locations. It says that at landing zone 2, which was on White Sands, that they found bodies that were dissected as one would a frog. What they did not say is, were they animals, were they humans, or were they alien bodies? There is no question to me, because subsequently over the last 4 to 5 decades, there have been people who had first-hand knowledge of what happened when they got inside the craft at White Sands, and they could push against the walls, and it was how they found that on certain tappings and frequencies, the walls would open up, and inside were body parts. Again, they have not defined were the body parts that were in the walls of one of the craft animals, human, or alien. And this is the underbelly of the story you don't hear.
And
I just want to finish one thing. I want to make sure that everybody understands. I'm not saying that the Roswell crash was flying wing aircraft the U.S. was developing. What I think is actually was going on is I think those aircraft were being developed, advanced German technology from the war, to fight and shoot down the alien craft. So the whole Roswell incident with 3 different locations may have been one of these aircraft and 1 or 2 alien craft that they were fighting. So I think from the very beginning, we were engaged, we were viewed it as a military conflict, and I think that's why they moved all those planes down there to Roswell.
So I want to bring David in and get his take on all of the information, where you think the government is perhaps covering things up for us.
Well, okay. Well, I've got my Nikola Tesla t-shirt on. I mean, the Roswell crash and all the different various UFO crashes are fascinating. So much of it seems to go back to World War II. Prior to World War II, we had Tesla with all he claimed he had anti-gravity airships, he had his towers he was building, he was going to be broadcasting electricity into the atmosphere. This is in the 1920s. If you watch the old serials from the 20s and 30s of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and stuff like that, everything's electric. They're flying around in these buzzing spaceships, they're anti-gravity, you have the great old serial radar men from the moon. So they're buzzing around in this electric craft. And then during World War II, there came a very unusual incident, a series of incidents towards the end of the war, which is known as the Foo Fighters. We have the popular band out of Seattle now, Foo Fighters. I'm a big fan. So we had that, and the whole Foo Fighter incidents have not really been totally explained. I think many UFO researchers believe that somehow Foo Fighters were also extraterrestrial craft flying around Germany towards the end of the war. There's a number of unusual explanations for Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters are thought to have been relatively small. They were like glowing anti-gravity orbs that were flying in swarms around the bombers. It's thought they were unmanned type of craft, whether they were extraterrestrial or if perhaps the Germans had actually began developing that. One of the things with Germany was, in World War II, it's been explained to me by a number of historians, a major aspect of World War II was an oil war. And one of the things, the Axis powers in World War II, Germany, Italy, and Japan, mainly, one of the things that all three of these countries, they don't have oil reserves. And what they did during the war was take and occupy oil areas. The Japanese occupied the oil wells in Manchuria. The Germans took the oil wells in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and the Italians took over the oil fields in North Africa. So during the war, the Germans apparently were particularly interested in trying to develop technology that wasn't oil-based or rocket-based, was more electric, more like what Tesla was trying to develop. Mercury is part of that. There's the so-called Bell, and Ancient Aliens they did do a segment on that. To me, it's an important kind of thing. Immediately after the war, there was, as Mike was talking about, the Kenneth Arnold incident over the Cascades in Washington State. And that seems to be that was more of a flying wing or boomerang-shaped craft. But it's from that incident that we get the term flying saucer. Even though it wasn't actually a disc-shaped craft, but was more of a boomerang. But Kenneth Arnold described it, and it wasn't just one craft, was it?
No, it was 9, and it was flying in formation, which you would do if you were military, or also, I guess, if you're alien. And the reason he described it as, it was as if you were to take a teacup saucer and skip it across a pond. They would jump like this and very stable. The interesting thing is the reason flying wings never worked in the 40s and 50s was because they were inherently unstable airframes. So what that means is that we weren't able to actually get the B-2 to work until we developed fly-by-wire technology, which is fiber optics, which we also got from the 1942 Cape Girardeau crash. So in other words, it took us decades to achieve the control surface control so that we could make those things fly.
And there is something here, if you, in your mind's eye, you can think of a timeline. We're talking about July 2nd to 5th, 1947, and then when we talk about Kenneth Arnold, we're only going back 1 week. It was June 24th, 1947. So the 4 or 3 of the wedge shape came down between July 2nd and July 5th of 47. It was only 1 week apart. But what I think is the truth, and that it is not correct, if we don't go back to April of 1941, 6 full years before. And I am personally convinced, even though we would love to have more evidentiary proof, but I am personally convinced that in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, that Mike just brought up, that it's another wedge shape. Mm-hmm. This is according to people who were there and have talked to people who lived there, but they won't go in front of cameras. And they say it was a wedge shape that had swoopy curves, like General Twining called it a planform. And here is one of the most significant things to take away today. There were 2 bodies. They were autopsied. Both of the bodies taken out of that wedge-shaped craft at Cape Girardeau were defined as clones. You can imagine President Franklin Delano Roosevelt going to his Secretary of War, George Marshall, and his Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, and saying, if we are dealing with clones in this craft, then who made the clones? Where are they? What happens when they show up? And that has to be where our government began running scared.
So I want to bring Nick in to the conversation. We talk about that they took evidence, they took wreckage and so on to various places for examination, and then these reports come out. I know you did an investigation into Roswell Manor as a potential one of those. Could you tell us a little about the history of Roswell Manor and why you think that might be one of these secret bases?
Sure. Well, Roswell Manor is a military establishment in the United Kingdom. It served for a while as the headquarters, actually, of the Air Force Police, but it had a number of other roles over the years, more steeped in intelligence and security matters. And Roswell Manor, which was the subject, by the way, of course, of an Ancient Aliens episode last season, which I'm sure some of you have seen. That's the one where Giorgio and I went up to the door and, yeah, nothing to see here, go away, move along. And officially, Roswell Manor is now closed, but there's all sorts of interesting private security there now. And certainly, it is beyond dispute that there are underground facilities there and tunnels. It is all part of a wider network, sometimes known as the Corsham Underground Bunker. And indeed, the UK, dating back certainly to the Second World War, had a number of these places where during the Second World War and then subsequently during the Cold War, the plan was that if there was a period of international tension, the royal family, the government would be evacuated to this secret bunker and this deep underground facility. So Roswell Manor, over the years, did get involved in some UFO research, and that's one of the reasons why people believe that any UFO crashes that may or may not have occurred in the United Kingdom, the wreckage may well have ended up at Roswell Manor, simply because that was the sort of secure facility where you would keep something highly classified. Now, I was not personally read on to any of those intelligence programs, so I can, if you'll excuse the language, neither confirm nor deny any of that was true. And I am still bound by my secrecy oath, even though I've left the Ministry of Defence some years ago, so I'm certainly not in a position where I would be able to or willing to divulge classified information. But Roswell Manor is certainly something worth looking at, and those of you who haven't seen that episode of Ancient Aliens, do watch it. It is, I think, it did a very good job. I want to make one wider comment which perhaps contextualizes some of this. A lot of people say, if any of this is true, why the secrecy? Why would governments cover any of this up? Is it because of fear that it would destabilize the political system, undermine people's faith in religious belief? Would it crash the stock market? Would it cause panic in the street? We've heard all these theories. I don't think they're correct. The single biggest reason why UFO secrecy would be brought into play relates to the technology, because the government, or maybe now corporation, that first acquires and back engineers and understands this technology and then can use it for itself, that government is going to be the dominant power on the face of this planet for the foreseeable future, politically, militarily, and economically. Now, those are very high stakes, and that, I believe, is what lies at the heart of UFO secrecy. And there's a throwaway line in a declassified British government intelligence assessment known colloquially as Project Condign, and it talks about this, and it says, whatever we think we may be dealing with here, whatever the true nature of the UFO phenomenon, there are novel military applications that can be derived from a fuller understanding of it. Novel military applications.
would just like to say I totally agree with Nick on that. And what the real cause of the secrecy and the real secret is, it's technology. The extraterrestrials are here, and the moon, and we have visitors, and all that kind of stuff, ancient aliens. That's, I think, not of such concern to them, say the military, the government. It's the technology, and it's letting this technology out a little bit at a time, testing it, using it, perfecting it themselves, perhaps even creating their own stargates, teleportation. We have stories like the Philadelphia experiment, plenty of other things like that, time travel experiments, all that kind of stuff. I believe it goes on, and that's the real secret, that this technology is being developed and perhaps has been developed already by our government and other governments around the world. They're all intensely interested in this.
And that's why that crack in the New York Times, December 16, 2017, why it was so significant that after 70 years, on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, they were basically saying, whether it's true or not, they were laying out that this is infrared gun camera footage from fighter jets in which the pilots are totally buffaloed by what are they looking, and that when you look at the videos, assuming that it is UFO technology and not something of ours that we're trying to muddy the waters with, it is moving at speeds that we cannot achieve and doing patterns that we could not do, a human could not survive. So the fact that somebody decided in the To the Stars, Tom DeLonge, all of that group, that they would put this infrared video out as sort of like the first next concession that may or may not be leading up to the big headline we all want, we're not alone in the universe. It came through technology that they are saying baffles them.
You know, can I just, I looked at the videos and I think they're all drones. I don't think they're anything significant in terms of that. What's significant, and you just made the point, is not what's on the videos. That doesn't even really matter. What matters is that the government is putting this out there, allowing it to come out, and wanting you to believe, or at least to consider the possibility, that this is alien technology, that there are visitors. But to me, that is the big picture. It's the big sea change in the culture, is that they're now basically admitting, we study this stuff, we don't understand it, and guess what, it might be real. That's huge.
And Mike, it's that name of that office, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Project. Why is threat the only way they can get money, or is it that they still consider that some part of all of this is a threat?
And in many ways, this is disclosure. So the disclosure's happening now. It's been happening the last 20, 30 years, even more perhaps. It's not something that just happens one day when the president says extraterrestrials are here. It's an ongoing thing, and I think that releasing that footage is part of it.
Yeah, it's piece by piece, bit by bit, little by little, just to get you used to the idea.
But we're not alone in the universe, you guys. And the families have never known the truth.
You know, that's interesting, because think of all the crashes we've had. Crashes that we've had in the last couple of months. Our military aircraft, I mean, is maybe, now I think about it in a completely new context. Maybe these so-called crashes are not accidents. Maybe they're still trying to carry out those orders, or maybe those orders have been reinstated.
I know we probably put the questions here real quick, but one other incident to mention is the Battle of Los Angeles. There's famous photos, and then that was
February
1942.
And so that, they fired thousands of shells at this huge craft that was hovering right over Los Angeles. So.
And it made the front page of the LA Times.
So I think that's very much true. They, particularly right after World War II, they deflected us from UFO incidents and promoted rockets and the oil industry. And finally, we are just now getting electric cars. We could have had them 40 years ago if the oil companies had allowed us. The world's economy is based on oil right now. And it would collapse if all of this technology came out right away. And many third world countries who only have oil, their economies would collapse too. So it shows you how our planet right now, and fortunately I believe we're in a very important transition stage out of the oil-based economy into an electric one. And that's part of the thing with these flying saucers and UFO craft. They're not rockets, they're not jets. They're electric, they're anti-gravity. It's a super technology that's apparently quite clean as well.
Because it isn't like we're dealing with one agenda or one intent. There seems to be a mixture of various agendas by various types, and then the confusion of why it is a 16-layer chess game. It is very clear that there may be 2 or 3 prime intelligences who may have conflict with each other, but they make androids, they make clones, they make cyborgs. And that's what is interacting with Earth more than the prime intelligence from my point of view. So how do you tell the players? How do you tell what intent is? And the fact that in the beginning, our government was taking a hostile attitude and trying to shoot them down for exactly what we've been talking about, that technology, once we were exposed to technology that appeared to neutralize gravity, then that's what we wanted. So you've got conflicts of trying to keep development of technology from the United States to other countries. That's one conflict. Then you have the layers of which prime intelligences are we actually dealing with, and the types of intermediary AI that they deal with us in the world. That's why this is so complex.
And remember, governments are like corporations, like the Boeing company, I worked for them for years, Northrop Grumman. They're not one company. There's a whole bunch of different companies. The commercial division is different than the Defense Department, the Defense Division. It's the same thing with governments. NSA, CIA, those are all separate operations. So some of them may decide that they're at war with aliens, and some of them may be working with aliens. It's bizarre because, but that's the way governments are. They're not homogenous. It's not one big thing, and there isn't one overarching command that's controlling anything. Even MJ-12, I think, must have limitations.
But you're going to put your loyalty with the human race that is about to be extinct, or with the government?
Okay, thank you. I've signed the Official Secrets Act, and I take my loyalty oath very seriously. So my loyalty, I know this is not going to be a popular statement with some people, but when I see people who are whistleblowers, the problem with that is very often the person blowing the whistle, whether it's Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, whoever it is not the person who is the subject matter expert. So you get these people who say, hey, the people have a right to know, and I get that, but what they don't realize that if you tell the American people something through the media, you're also telling the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and ISIS. So there's a reason why people like myself do stay loyal to our secrecy oath. And I apologize if people are offended by that, but that's the way I am wired.
Aztec, New Mexico.
And what's that?
I only get one question.
That was a 99 point, I believe it measured, and I don't know how the government measured it to this, 99.92 feet in diameter. And the Aztec story that I and a few others have investigated, and I've talked to a number of eyewitnesses and people who were involved and even knew about the government operation. We went in there pretending that it was an oil company in order to start closing roads so that they could get to this nearly 100-foot diameter silver craft. And there were people who got up on top of the craft, and there were several bodies inside of the craft. And there have been some books written, and I have done a tremendous amount of research about Aztec that's at my news website, earthfiles.com. But it is odd that Aztec, as a story as significant as Roswell, has never penetrated, for reasons that are not clear, the general audience. It may be because the federal government does pushback on stories that are especially sensitive. And there was a lot of pushback from government agencies on Aztec. It occurred, as far as I know, in March of 1948. March of 1948. But the government of the United States played shell games, even suppressing the editor of one of the newspapers and others, and that's why we don't have clarity. But I'm telling you, Aztec, New Mexico is really significant.
And Aztec is in New Mexico. It's north of Albuquerque. It's near the Colorado border. It's a small town near Farmington, New Mexico. That's Aztec, New Mexico. It sounds like it's in Mexico, but it's in. So it's north of Roswell.